Welcome to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams, where each fortnight you'll hear the stories of industry veterans and learn the secrets to sustainably amplifying value from your software platform investments.
Have you ever wondered how a business goes from startup to being a global juggernaut? In my experience, it takes a lot of hard work and reinvention. Welcome to a second episode in a two-part series on how mature technology companies integrate platform teams into their broader engineering capability. You're listening to Platform Diaries, and I'm your host, Shane Williams. My guest today is John Railton, General Manager of Customer Platforms at online small business accounting software firm Xero. John is highly accomplished both academically and professionally and has lived and worked right across the globe in various Salesforce and other leadership roles. We discuss the telltale signs that your systems and ways of working aren't ready for hypergrowth, how John has transformed his Salesforce practice and the influence of Matt Skeldon and Manuel Peixe, and John's top 3 tips for leaders who need to rethink their ways of working to enable scale. I trust you'll enjoy the interview. So John, welcome to Platform Diaries.
Awesome. Thanks, Shane. Nice to be here, mate. Appreciate it.
All right. So today's topic, we want to have a bit of a chat about moving from a startup to a scale up and the sort of growing pains and what that takes to transform and enable a business to really achieve scale. And so I'm looking forward to today's conversation, John, because I know you've been on that journey. We've been talking about it for a little while. But before we get to that, perhaps I could ask you just to tell us a little bit about yourself, your career story, and what you do now at Xero.
Yeah, cool. No worries. I think we've had many chats in the past and they're always good. So appreciate those too. I'm currently General Manager of Customer Platforms at Xero. And Xero is a company started in New Zealand, in Wellington. It's grown to be a huge company now. And we have millions of customers around the world. On the personal front, I grew up in Auckland in New Zealand, a little old New Zealand, or Aotearoa. I'm a father of a beautiful 6-year-old daughter named Eva, and I'm an avid sports and fitness fan. In terms of my career, I started off studying a Bachelor of Business, double majoring in Business Information Systems and Management. I was lucky enough to graduate with the highest grade point average in my university, and I was the top Business Information Systems graduate and the top Māori graduate as well. I've been working in technology for about 20 years now. Hopefully those gray hairs aren't showing. Working in a number of different technology roles, including running my own business too. Most of those years have been mainly working with Salesforce, way back in the day before Trailhead existed, and we used to watch those terrible videos on how to train on Salesforce. Remember those ones? Yeah. I've worked as a Salesforce consultant for a number of enterprise companies around New Zealand and Australia. I've also worked in Sweden and Germany as well. I was a development manager at Les Mills International, leading a global development team. And during that time, I became super passionate about leadership and growing high-performing teams. And that's kind of where we connect a lot, Shane, because I know you are too. After Les Mills, I moved to Sydney, Australia to become Salesforce Delivery Manager at Qantas, working with a great team there. And then I came back to Auckland again to become Head of Technology at New Zealand Post. And now I'm at Xero as GM of Customer Platforms. My current role at Xero includes looking after our customer platforms and the engineering teams, working and supporting them, with Salesforce being a really large part of that. There's about nearly 50 people now on my team, globally around the world, mainly between Australia and New Zealand, and soon to be North America. And we're very flexible, lots of remote working roles too, as it's the norm these days, right, to have that. I also have 15 Salesforce certifications, including being a Salesforce certified application architect and certified system architect.
When we first met in 2020, you're about to embark on this type of transformation. You're about a year into it now. So can you unpack some of the lessons and advice you've got for listeners who are about to go on that journey?
Yeah, cool. No worries. So, the scaling journey involves a lot of, hardship, and during that hardship, you're going to experience a lot of pain, right? And you're going to get a lot of scars from that pain. And those are lessons you learn from that, right? So some of the lessons and signals we experienced, I'll just mention them shortly, but they really stuck around and changed the way we did things and changed the way we operate in the future as well. And one of those signs was the increased demand to support the hypergrowth of Xero, because Xero's got very lofty and ambitious BHAG goals, right? We're a startup moving to scale up, and we're hiring like crazy at the moment. So how do you keep up with that growth? And a good way or analogy to sort of unpack that is the Jenga game or the tower building game, right? So if you're building on top of your tower and you've got gaps down the bottom, inevitably at one point in time that may crumble, right? So how do you support that foundation is really crucial. And some of the signs that we noticed were critical production incidents. If those keep popping up more and more, that sort of signals that your foundation is getting pretty shoddy and you need to fix those and plug those gaps. So keeping track of those incidents is really important, and figuring out how to address them and learn from those failures too. The second sign, which is probably a really big one for most people, is increased cognitive load, right? And this is, a common lesson for most people when they're going through this journey, is that the brain can only take so much, before you have to sort of recover and readjust how you do things. We're notoriously bad at multitasking. There's a few studies that show that only about 2.5% of us can do it effectively. I'm definitely not one of them. I'm not sure about you, Shane, but I don't like people talking to me when I'm driving. I'm like, hey, be quiet, kind of thing. And there's obvious health implications with that as well, and productivity issues, and it's not sustainable, right? So, and the scaling journey isn't a sprint, right? So you're not that US sprinter with the big muscles sprinting down the 100-meter track. Usually the opposite of that. And you're the marathon runner who's trying to keep up with his pace and sustain it over time, right? So as a company grows, try to do the opposite of the sprinting and try to focus on the jogging and keeping your people fresh. And it's mandatory that your people's well-being is the number one priority, right? The third sign that we experienced was a massive increase in communication channels. So as the team grew and we had more people come on board, this led to the concept of Brooks Law, right? Which you've probably heard before. And Brooks Law is essentially saying that adding more people to a software project makes it later. You may naturally just want to add more people because you think it's going to, fix things. And that's the natural response. Hey, we need to hire more people to get stuff done. But it's not necessarily the case or the way to fix it, right? So, if you increase the communication channels, you're going to have more lines of communication. Right. So one way we sort of addressed that was reducing our team sizes and making them autonomous. Right. So we call these teams pods. And the sweet spot that we sort of aim for is the 5 to 8 spot in terms of people size. And we found out that they can sort of autonomously and effectively collaborate well in a much better way. So, the opposite of that sort of slowed us down. So those are the three big signs that we sort of noticed in our journey.
Awesome, mate. Thanks. And you talked about how you've changed and how you're thinking about the size of teams and communication now. Perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about sort of pre-transformation and about your platform team. And could you describe kind of the structure, the ways of working and the objectives at the time?
Yeah, the pre-transformation is probably still traditional for most places. And, if I'm going to just explain what it looks like, there might be a few people saying, yeah, that's kind of how we are today. So pre-transformation, we didn't have a Salesforce platform team in general. It never existed, right? And today it obviously does, but traditionally it was a shared responsibility throughout the whole team. It was sort of like the drunken uncle at the Christmas party, so, there's that guy we've got to sort of look after, or there's the platform we sort of have to look after. You kind of have to, but no one really wants to do it, because it's like family or it's part of your job. But, and more people wanted to focus on the shiny project or the strategic initiative coming up to help, grow value of the company, and I understand that, can empathize that, the cool new innovative solutions are more attractive than looking after the platform. But that negative stigma around boring platform work is not the way forward, right? So in order to support scale, you actually have to focus on it. right? So if you ignore that foundation, it's just pretty much like the Jenga effect I was talking about before. So that was pre-transformation. We never had a team in general to look after the platform.
And then contrasting that with today, what's the material differences? You kind of described team size and communication channels, but I suppose if I was to ask you what's the major differences and what's important?
Yeah, so the material difference today is we now have a dedicated Salesforce platform team, right? That's the biggest difference. So this obviously was a luxury in the past, and in my opinion, it's mandatory now to scale, right? Especially for enterprise level organizations. If you don't have one in place, please set one up. This ensures that the platform gets the love it deserves finally, right? And you can continue to put those pieces on top of the Jenga tower safely without distractions. And an example of this could be Salesforce major releases for the platform. So in the past, as I mentioned, it was a shared responsibility through all our streamline teams, and sometimes things would get missed in terms of gaps and you would have a production incident. If you have a dedicated platform team, they have that space and purpose to be able to look after your system and be able to find those before they happen, right? So previewing those in the sandbox and giving it the time it deserves, rather than just finding out later because it's the drunken uncle that you don't want at the Christmas party. Yeah, the other thing that was really different was because we had a dedicated platform team now, that allowed us to have that sort of motivational effect of autonomy and mastery, right? Similar to Dan Pink's book, Drive. And if people have that autonomy and mastery, they feel proud about what they do. And it sort of changes the light on the bad stigma that it used to have and sort of become a space to shine, right? So now our platform team is actually respected and seen as the gurus. And really, it's a place now where people actually want to work within our area rather than sort of just putting it off and sort of ignoring it in the past. And I also think that it aligns with, it's really strong with Simon Sinek's work too, right? Like start with why, figuring out what your purpose is. So those are the big differences that we've noticed at the moment, having that platform team in.
Someone who's actually taken the book and applied it to platform is something that we've not spoken about before. It's kind of people have hinted at it being an influence potentially within the organization, but not.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Have people not applied it yet?
Well, I think they've applied it, but no one specifically talked about how they've applied it to platform. They've kind of applied, platform being a subset of the whole thing. They kind of talk more broadly around the organization, not specific to the platform.
Yeah, it's crucial, man. We've noticed a massive change with having that in place. And even then, like it's growing even more now too. Like I'm getting more people to join the platform team.
It's kind of building momentum for why they want to join. That's good.
Yeah. And the other thing is like Xero's own product has its own platform team as well, based on AWS, so not Salesforce. So they've been doing this for a long time, and they call it the PaaS team, Platform as a Service team.
It's interesting you talk about attracting talent internally within the organization towards the platform, because I know...
Yeah, we're fighting for talent internally as well.
Well, this is interesting, right? So back in the day at REA, when Salesforce was first introduced, it was kind of like, no, we develop software. We don't buy stuff off the shelf. It's not our culture, not our ethos. People even left the organization because of the decision. And in the early days, it was trying to encourage the devs to get involved and learn the Salesforce platform and write software to write on it. It was like, no, I write Ruby or I write something else and I don't want to learn Apex, which is fair. It had a stigma associated with it. But once I think the platform kind of evolved to, now you don't need to necessarily understand a specific Salesforce language in order to interact. You can be writing JavaScript and you just need to learn, if you're a React, you need to learn Angular or something along those lines. It kind of made it a bit more accessible. And over time, it became that there were developers who were actually genuinely interested. But I think things like DX and genuine CI pipelines and things needed to be introduced, because they're like, why would I go back to the dark ages? I'm used to having these tools on everything else that I write.
Yeah, no, previously in the past, Salesforce never offered that flexibility or that developer experience, right? So as a developer, and so be it, right? You want to have a good, nice experience working on whatever you're working on. And sometimes in the past, Salesforce wasn't that. And now it's changing, yeah.
So I think, some of it is definitely the technological change that supports enticing developers to come across. But I think,
and the salaries.
well, that's not hurting too. But I think there's also that, as I talked about in the book and some of the stuff you're putting into place, that how are you enabling these autonomous teams with simple modes of interaction that reduce their cognitive load and enable things to happen? And are you doing that on the platform team that's then going to enable reasons why I would want to join? And it almost sounds like, as you kind of described, you've got that happening now and you're attracting the talent because of it, which is really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. You got it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, that concept of mastery and autonomy, and you're talking about why in Synec's work. I took a lot of those influences into my practice back in the day, and those are kind of reflected in my book, where I'm talking about not only the teams having a purpose, but then creating a culture within a culture. So you've described your platform team as the unloved cousin, and now you've got a rally of people rallying around the platform to deliver value and are proud of that and enabling scale. And I agree. I think that's hyper important. Interestingly, though, you used a few examples and a few terms that I think are resonating for me because, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? But you've mentioned Brooks Law, you've mentioned streamline and platform teams, cognitive load, and I'm thinking there's a lot of concepts here that are, I guess, from a book that you and I talked about some time ago, team topologies. And it's interesting because the same book's come up in a couple of previous podcasts as well. So it almost seems like it's becoming a seminal work, if you like. How influential was that work in your new ways of working?
Yeah, it's funny because that book, Team Topologies, I found out internally at Xero, it was sort of becoming a really big, influential book. And it's really changed the way we think about organizational design, right? Especially for a technology company. And if you bring up our org structure now across our company, you can see it sort of showcasing in a few ways, right? And obviously we were inspired by some of the research, and the authors are very bright individuals, and I'm sure there's a lot of other organizations now doing the same. Yeah, it's definitely helped influence how we approach things now and how we work.
Maybe we should talk a little bit about some of the concepts in the book and how you've applied them. So team topologies sort of largely describes the types of teams and the interaction modes that are used to reduce that cognitive load you talked about earlier. For those who are familiar with the book and the concepts, could we perhaps talk about your Salesforce practice? And then from your perspective, do you think they are they a streamlined team? Are they a platform or an enabling team? How would you describe them? And of the teams you just described, how do they primarily interact? Is it the facilitation or collaboration, or is it more of a as a service style interaction mode?
I would describe it as pretty much all of them now, all of them combined. So through my experience, we went through an evolution kind of process, but right now all of those teams exist. So we have streamlined teams supporting specific areas of our business, and most importantly, customer experiences too, right, that tie with them. These are, for example, sales, service, marketing. We actually call our streams win, grow, and love, funny enough, internally. And each stream has its own purpose, right? So we also have the platform team I was just talking about previously. So we have our streamlined teams over the top and a platform team supporting them beneath and helping to enable those streamlined teams to sort of push out quick value to production and that release velocity. So one way our platform team support our streamlined teams is through DevOps, right? Or CI/CD or proactive monitoring, right? Which is also essential for scale. We all know how fun it is when you hit a governor limit in Salesforce. And I'm sure a few people are nodding that it does have really big impacts. Probably shouldn't laugh about it, but it's no fun indeed. So mitigating those as much as possible is really crucial in your journey. And the enabling teams that you talked about, we do have those too in our organization. So we've got an architecture team, enabling team as much as possible, providing that runway in terms of what solution design looks like and the architecture runway. We've also got security and data enabling our teams too. And the Salesforce practice you mentioned is being built over time, right? So it's essentially our own little center of excellence, although there's 50 people, so it's not that little. But I know when you talk about some of the other bigger partners, it's much bigger. But it's big for a customer internal team. And that just really helps with our governance, our consistency, our domain knowledge, and really mitigating shadow IT and misalignment, which is another key aspect to scale.
And then how do the teams primarily interact? Is it that sort of interaction like X as a service, or is it more collaboration, or does it in fact just change depending on context and time?
Yeah, definitely it depends on what's happening internally. And the interactions always as horizontal as we can make them be, because one of the key things in terms of reduction that you want to focus on is that siloed behavior, right? Or that tribalism or elitism. So you still want to mix that up as much as possible. So, the enabling team over the top is really engaged with the other teams as much as they can be. And the cadence and rhythm of those ceremonies to engage with them is crucial in terms of the way you want to structure them. That's, I think, a really crucial part, because you don't want to sort of leave teams to sort of operate by themselves, and you want to work as cohesively and collaboratively as much as you can.
Okay, so let's move on to some of the results that you got from this sort of transformation. Can you talk to me about sort of the greatest positive change that you achieved through the transformation? And I guess from that, what was your biggest learning, and do you reckon you've nailed it?
The greatest positive change, I think I've already touched on this quite a lot, is definitely creating that environment for autonomy, mastery, and purpose. It's really changed the way the teams operate, and essentially creating that high-performing team environment and culture. The biggest learning would have to be, it's a never-ending journey. There is literally no finish line as you scale. And the sooner you realize that, the better. Have you ever read David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me? Have you heard of that one?
No.
It's he's a former Navy SEAL and ultra marathon runner. And he's got this theme throughout his whole book that insinuates that no matter what you do, there's never a finish line, and you have to just keep growing and keep going. Right? And he knows what he's talking about, because he's always running hundreds of miles all the time, and literally hundreds of miles. And read the book and you know what I'm talking about. It's really awesome. Essentially, there's always more to do, right? So you have to keep growing, you have to keep learning, and never settle. But in terms of nailing it, I think we've done a great job. We've put the nail definitely in there and pushed it as far as we can go. But I'm just really grateful for having such a great team behind us, and great leaders in Xero at the moment, and mentors from the past that sort of helped us get to where we are. And, I've worked at a few places before and would rate us quite high, in comparison. So if you're looking for a place to work, let me know, reach out. Our Salesforce team is a great place to be.
So, mate, I am going to look that book up, because I think that's a really interesting philosophy of the goal line's always moving, and you've got to keep going. And I like how you kind of were able to go, I'm cognizant of the ever evolving need, but also that, I think we've done a hell of a good job in nailing it. Right, mate. So we're almost up on time, but it would be remiss of me not to hit you with my question I ask every guest, which is your 3 key pieces of advice. And so for this particular podcast and the topic we've been talking about, if there's an organization looking to move from startup to scale up, and they know they need to transform their ways of working, what would be your 3 key pieces of advice for those leaders?
Awesome. So the first piece of advice I have is to find and connect with passionate champions within your organization, right? So if you can find those people, then you're effectively able to drive positive change. And that's really important in terms of your journey from a startup to scale up, because there's lots of hardship on the way. And if you have that coalition formation and power and numbers with some key allies, it's just going to make that journey much easier. And the second piece of advice I have is to just have fun, right? So play and fun is a really big motivator. We all know this. It's It's no point working for an organization that's boring. You're just going to leave straight away. And there's no point taking this journey if it's boring as well. You're not having fun, right? So there's lots of awesome organizations out there that are really successful because they have fun, like Apple and Google, for example, and Xero, where I am, right? So the last piece of advice I've got is to really prioritize your people, right? So growing, hiring, and retaining good talent, but also getting rid of the bad apples, right? And I think there's research from Will Phelps around the bad apple effect and how it can decrease the performance of your team by 30%, right? If you have a bad apple, and that becomes quite toxic. So trying to find out who those bad apples are, getting rid of them, and then focusing on your good people, growing, retaining that talent as much as you can. That's probably the biggest thing to remember from this is treat that as your number one priority.
Mate, that's awesome advice. Thank you. And thank you for your time. Before we go, if there are listeners out there who are keen to hear a bit more or get in touch, how should they reach you?
Yeah, no worries. By email is all good. So john.railton at xero.com, and if you're really keen to find a good place to work as well, we're looking for Salesforce talent all the time too. So appreciate it, Shane.
Why not put a plug in there?
Yeah.
So, mate, thanks again. And I will put your email address in the show notes just so if people do want to reach out, they can get easy access to them. Once again, thanks for your time. And I look forward to chatting again soon.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it, Shane.
You've been listening to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams. For more information or to contact Shane, please visit shanewilliams.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.